Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Vibhuti Patel, distinguished guests and friends, I have great pleasure in welcoming all of you to this online commemoration of the International Women's Day 2021, brought to you by Gender Justice India. My name is Arun Amirtham. I'm in Zurich, Switzerland, and I thank you all for joining us today. Hearty welcome. It's a privilege and a pleasure to have Professor Vibhuti Patel speaking to us today. She is a pioneering authority and a thought leader on the topic for this evening, the dynamics of the women's movement in India, right from pre-independence 19th century through the independence struggle and to our contemporary society, through the roles and the participation, the protests and the struggles of women at the very frontiers of our life in politics and society. She needs no introduction. We do have a sheet here indicating all the journeys and the stations during her exemplary career at the Tata Institute of Social Science, at the SNDT Women's College, after having earned her PhD in economics from the University of Mumbai and having done a fellowship to the London School of Economics and Political Science. She has authored numerous books as well as several chapters of multiple other books. She is known to many of us, and she is loved and recognized and respected for her authority. A few questions to perhaps bear in mind as we listen today to Professor Vibhuti Patel. How can we move from beyond the principles of natural justice to the practice of gender equality? How can we move from tokenism to solid trends, from lip service to trailblazing leadership for a gender-just society? How can we, as a society, dispel the prevalent narrative of neglect, oppression, abuse, even rape, and transition to a state of equal rights, participatory engagement, joint decision-making, and collaborative work in civic life? Even as we look back at history and glean our lessons, we need to dare and be creative and bold to move forward. Please join me in applauding Professor Vibhuti Patel as we welcome her to speak to us. Professor Patel, let me pass the baton over to you.
Friends, happy Women's Day. I express my heartfelt thanks to Shri Arun Amirtham for giving me this opportunity. I see many known faces. I have Dr. Alice Clark, who has done a pioneering work for the girls' rights. We have Dr. Bhavna from SNDT Women's University, Dr. Krishnaya from Karnataka University, and Shivani, my own students, they are here, and it gives me a great pleasure to interact on such an important issue and bringing out the nuances of the women's movement, women's rights movement over the last 50 years, and also the legacy that we got from our foremothers. First of all, I would like to salute our foremothers who played a very important role when Jhansi Ki Rani was fighting against colonial rule in India in 1857. We had women workers in Chicago who were fighting collectively, asking for the rights, very human rights of the working class, and also labor standards of 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, and 8 hours of rest. And they also asked for creche, daycare centers for their children, and humane condition of work. They had to face a lot of retaliation from the employers, from the society. And it was in 1910 when the world was preparing for the whole ruling elite of the world was preparing for the First World War. And there was a jingoism. That was a time where women from toiling masses, the representatives of toiling poor, they gathered in Germany, and Clara Zetkin, a revolutionary, declared 8 March as an International Women's Day. And after that, we see that International Women's Day was commemorated, because commemoration happens in respect of martyrdom of our foremothers. And in 1975, this day got an official stamp from the United Nations. And after that, the commemoration was replaced by celebration, because so many celebratory activities like the achievements of women's movement were being discussed. So here I'm trying to cover the span of nearly 200 years of women's movement. But first of all, like we would like to I would like to thank the Gender Justice India and Five Elements SDG for providing me this platform to discuss such an important issue. Now, is this full screen? Yeah. So the mission of the women's movement, as we know that it was, as it was there in a declaration in the International Women's Gathering, that it is a sisterhood, solidarity, strength, that these are the major concern, that collective endeavor, collective wisdom, and collective effort that can bring the social transformation and tilt the gender balance in favor of equity and equality. The women's movement is mainly focused on challenging subordination, oppression, exploitation, subjugation, injustice, and discrimination against girls and women, with the aim to establish gender equality in all spheres of life. So women's movement strives for liberation of humankind, because there has always been a motto that we can't have a liberation of humankind without women's liberation. You can't leave the 50% of the population from the 50% of the society. And we can't have women's liberation without whole humanity with us. So I think the solidarity is the major principle in women's movement. And challenging the patriarchal control over sexuality, fertility, and labor that harms everybody, because any toxic patriarchy is also against a person who is gentle, who is just, who is a just, who is a civil. It is also harmful to all women, men, and even transgender people. All are brutalized by sexism and gender roles. So men are our allies. All of us have a baggage of patriarchy, and we have to shade those baggage and strive for the gender just society. Now, it was in the early, like right from 12th century to the 19th century, we saw so many important liberatory forces that emerged, though the historian call it a medieval dark period, but that there was a time that the Saint movement and the Sufi movement flourished. Amir Khusro, who was a man, and who was or Kabir, Surdas, all of them were very much for egalitarian society. We had a Lal Day in Kashmir who wrote. She personally suffered a lot. Her in-laws were very cruel. She was abandoned. She did not even have clothes to wear. She used to move naked. But her verses, which she wrote about the liberation, about the harmony, about living in harmony with nature, harmony with fellow human beings, and their egalitarian lived life, that itself created such an important legacy. Now also, current generation is also getting inspiration from Lal De's verses. Another was a Habba Khatun. She was in the 16th century. She was a queen. She gave up all her luxurious life. She started staying in a hut. She also became like she started moving. She was interact with the people. She would mix with the people. She wrote so many verses which talked about egalitarian ethos and transcending the barriers of caste, class, and ethnic tribes which were there in those days in Himalayan valleys. We had Mirabai, again a Rajput queen, and she also gave up all her aristocratic life. She became like a saint poetess, and her verses are so important. If you read Parita Mukta's book published by Oxford University Press, you know that even now also in Rajasthan, nobody names the daughter as Meera, because she transcended the barrier of domesticity, and she started mingling with the people of all. Though she was from upper caste, she mingled with everybody. Whosoever invited her to sing her bhajan, she went there. And we also had when it comes to the Western feminism, we start with Mary Wollstonecraft's pioneering work, Vindication of Rights of Women, with strictures on political and moral subjects, where she exposed, giving so many examples of the Victorian era. And she said that why it is very important that women being treated as a citizen. And we know that right from the time of Aristotle and Plato, the citizens were only man and tax-paying man. So slaves and women were not even treated as citizens. And this also snowballed into suffragist movement, which Gandhiji got inspiration of Satyagraha also from suffragist movement. He saw how these women peacefully demanded the equal right for women in the politics and governance. So we saw when it comes to the collective strength of women workers in Europe and USA, we saw that the first gathering devoted to women's rights in United States was held in July 1848 in the Seneca Fall, and the declaration of Seneca Fall, it's so powerful. Now also we refer to it whenever we prepare our memorandum or charter of demand. And after that, the declaration was read, all those women who supported them, they also signed the petition demanding equal rights of women, because even those who were against abolition of slavery, when it came to the women's rights, they became silent. They did not want to take any stand, and then women had to fight their battle all by themselves. So we saw that working simultaneously, when the middle class women were demanding a right to vote, you had a working class women who were asking for the labor standards, the human condition of work, and also the process, the right to unionize and collective bargaining. And many of you must have heard this song. It's there on YouTube. There are several versions of this song, "Bread and Roses," which talks about which says that we don't want bullet, we want bread. We don't want rifle, we want milk for our children. And we know the "Bread and Roses" became such an important song, which galvanized so many women across the world to oppose jingoistic and very competitive warmongering mentality. And they demanded peace and harmony. And now also it is such a important song, and it is sung now also on 8th March. Now, capturing the nuances of most important discourses within families. The one thing good about the women's rights movement is that whether you ideologically agree or not, you may have a different plural interpretation of the same phenomena. Okay, those who are liberal feminists, they say that they for their focus is on constitutional guarantee. Marxist feminists, they situate women's woes in the class contradiction. Radical feminists see patriarchy as a major villain, which controls the women's sexuality, fertility, and labor. And then you have a socialist feminist who see all forms of hierarchical organization in the society based on caste, class, race, religion, ethnicity, patriarchy. In fact, it was the socialist women's feminist perspective which brought the discourse on intersectionality into the overall feminist politics. And then we have a psychoanalyst feminist who say that each and every woman has a individual journey. They accept Freud to a certain extent, that Freud did an important job of bringing the question of mental, so-called, that time they used to call mental deviation or a madness, from the realm of cruelty and torture to the realm of dialogue and discourse. But Freud also had a misogyny when he said or talked about Electra complex and Oedipal complex and penis envy and women being a mutated man, and women and children's testimony cannot be trusted, because all those women who confided in Freud, he listened to them, he gave a sympathetic hearing, but he did not believe them. He thought that those women who were talking about domestic violence or torture or incest, or children were talking about child sexual abuse, he saw it as a bad dream. He called it fantasy. It took women's movement to collectively come up with their first participatory action research and their own experience that yes, violence against women exists, rape exists, the child sexual abuse is very much there, incest is very much there. And in 1980, like when so many women who were providing support to women survivor of violence. Many of them were from the background of psychology. They questioned misogyny of Freud, but at the same time, they also said that psychoanalysis as a tool is very important. And the Juliet Mitchell's book, Psychoanalysis and Feminism, became very, very popular. It provided so many useful tips based on her personal experience. Then in the 80s, we also saw another very important trend, and especially that was after the Foucault and Derrida's writings, and they asked for challenging all meta theories and dominant discourse, because dominant discourse did not capture the people who were voiceless, who were at the periphery, who were treated as a deviant, mad, unemployed, so-called sponge on the economy, or those who were subjugated because of the race, class, caste, and postmodernism currently also is extremely popular among Dalit feminists, among Black feminists, among people in the post-colonial societies. We also had a very important movement in 1972 in Tehreek Garhwal in India, which talked about Chipko movement, hug the trees. And that was the time where so many developmental projects which are coming up in Himalaya. One was a thermal project. The timber merchants also were arbitrarily felling tree, mainly to make furniture for the urban people. And that created tremendous ecological damage to Himalayas. There were landslides, there were water tables were going down, rivulets and tributaries and ponds, they were drying up. Women who were in Himalayan Valley, it is women who have a responsibility of collection of fuel, fodder, water, animal care, kitchen gardening, and they were finding that they were not getting water. After walking for miles together, they won't get even one pitcher of water. Suicide rates among women increased because of the frustration. Their livelihood became so acute survival struggle. And the men who were hired by the timber merchant to fell the tree, they were on a daily wage basis. The contractor who gave them wages, they also sold the same from the same table. They were selling liquor also. So whatever wages this man got, who got used in liquor, many of them became alcoholic. They took debt from the same contractor, and they because of indebtedness, all their daughters, young virgin daughters of Himalayas, they were taken, trafficked to the red light areas of cities in India, and trafficking of girls became such a big thing. And it is in this context that Gora Devi and so many women from Tehreek Garhwal met Gandhian leader Sundarlal Bahuguna and Chandi Prasad, and they started a Chipko movement. And that was the time where a young college girl who went there for a field work, Vandana Shiva, and she got so influenced by the logic of it. They said, this is not development, it is a destruction. And she wrote a book, Staying Alive. And we know that ecofeminist has become such an important trend in feminism, and women's role in subsistence economy, which they brought to the fore, that is such an important for the survival of humankind. Your food sovereignty, food security comes by the subsistence crop. Women have not been lured by the commercial crop, and women have symbiotic relationship with mother nature that is found by so many others as a very too romantic. But male dominated development models, which believe in conquering mother nature, that has created havoc, and the violence towards both mother earth and violence against women. We have a Black feminist where the race is the very important reality for them. The Black feminist says we can't forget color of our skin. When it comes to fighting internal patriarchy, our own man's patriarchal behavior, that is an internal problem of us. But when we have to fight racism, we will fight shoulder to shoulder with our man, and that was the stand. Even women who were in anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, they had taken that. And currently, one of the most popular trends in feminism is a womanism, where so many women artists and so many people in the field of art and creative work, they call themselves womanism, because they feel that feminism only talks about oppression and subordination and all the sob stories, while womanism has a celebratory aspect, because they draw inspiration from 500 years of slavery. In the midst of this slavery and dehumanizing existence, how African women their resilience, they preserved their art and their culture and their cuisine and their craft, and the whole African legacy, the legacy of the foremothers and forefathers, that was passed on to the current generation. And that shows that under no circumstances you can just silence and completely destroy women. And they call themselves womanism, and they said this resilience of women we want to celebrate, and that's why we are womanist. Now, whatever may be your understanding of uh, political ideological understanding of which trend of feminism you belong, but in women's rights movement there's plural understanding of women's movement and women's reality. And but we all are still, we are together because we want to uh, fight against all the oppressive hierarchical forces. Now we have a post-colonial feminism that is about which challenges the universal sisterhood, and there are intersectional marginalities of gender, social, class, race, ethnicity, and sexual preference, because now the transgender community, LGBTQIA community, is also very, very active in challenging the patriarchal inequality. And they also are very post-colonial feminists are extremely respectful of indigenous feminist movements, because the indigenous movements, like the dominant discourse would see see indigenous women only as a victim of oppressive order, but they don't accept their agency. They don't accept the way they are striving and struggling to survive, and also challenging the existing oppressive order. And we also have a transnational feminism, which developed out of post-colonial feminism and also women of color feminism. And they now accept that, yes, sisterhood is global, because the oppressive class, the world capitalism is global, and it exposes the harmful impact of globalization capitalism on people across nations, across races, genders, sexes, classes, and sexualities. At the same time, it simultaneously advocates for working to lay groundwork for more productive and equitable social relations among women across borders and also across cultural contexts. We have to be polite, we have to be humble to and learn from other cultures. We have to emulate the best practices. We have to amplify the concerns of women across different cultures. Now, the first wave of feminism in South Asia, when we say that we are the South Asia, the patriarchy has a very certain, very, very important features, where they are, and the women's struggles are marked by it was in the 19th century that we saw that women social reform movement fought against child marriages, widow burning, female infanticide, and also worked very hard to promote education of women and also women's voting right. Those who say that Indian women got voting right on platter, which is not true, because for 30 years we have seen how women from All India Women's Conference, Sarojini Naidu, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, they had to really struggle within Congress to see to it that women are to see to it that women get voting right and they are treated as equal citizens. Another thing was that all those person like Savitri Bai Phule, the first teacher of modern education in India, how much of social stigma and exclusion and oppression she faced for promoting education among women who were socially outcast, the widows or Dalits. The first school for Dalit children she started. Children who were abandoned because they were born, they were so-called illegitimate children. She adopted a child, one abandoned child of a Brahmin widow. Who was pregnant. We don't know how she became pregnant. Maybe she was raped, or maybe she was seduced, whatever. But such widows earlier were abandoned. They had to commit suicide. But Mahatma Phule and Savitri Bai Phule, they fought against those customs. The journey that began with the 19th century social reform movement and culminated in the 20th century freedom movement resulted in a constitutional guarantee of equality, freedom, equal opportunity for women irrespective of their class, caste, creed, race, religion in India under the leadership of Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. But along with Baba Saheb, there were 15 women, very, very brave, very intellectually endowed, very committed to the freedom movement. They also played a very important role in Constituent Assembly. Some of them, Dakshayani Velayuddhan, who was a Dalit woman, you know that in Kerala, those days, the Shudras women were not even allowed to cover their chest. So they had to fight their personal battle. Her brother was in freedom movement. He was supportive to her. Gandhiji spotted her talent, and she came to the national scenario. And when the Baba Sahib was creating a constituent assembly, who should be included in such a mammoth task. These 15 women, whether she was Hansaben Mehta, she played a very important role at the time of UDHR in 1948. She was representing India, and UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, did not even have a word woman. And she's the one who stood up in the UN General Assembly. And she questioned that what kind of UDHR you are talking about. During both the world wars, women have played a pivotal role. When men were busy killing each other, women were the ones who ran the economy. They were everywhere. They have sacrificed the most. They have suffered the most, because when the war got over, all these men who were either killed or wounded or psychologically damaged because of the brutality they had seen during the war. There's women who stood by them. And then UDHR doesn't even include 50% of world's population. And as a result of her objection, they had to constitute a special committee under chairpersonship of Madam Roosevelt. And they revised, and women's concerns were included in UDHR. So all those 15 women, they were extremely endowed. They had from a different location. There's some, there were Rajkumari, Amrit Kaur, and they were Begum, some Nawab from the Nawab family. You had women who were middle class educated, person like Sarojini Naidu, who was highly creative. She was a Nightingale of India. So all these women, after the independence, most of them, they became the institution builder, or they joined, or they became a good educationist, or they became good diplomat or bureaucrat. A couple of them, very, very few of them joined active politics. But large number of women, they went back to homemaking, because, and middle class women got right to education. And we saw that resurgence of new fervor in the women's rights, which did not see themselves as a philanthropist or a social worker, because feminists and women's rights activists, they say we are not doing anything for others. It is our own battle. We are fighting for our human rights. And in 1970, when the anti-colonial struggles became very important, when the solidarity for the Vietnam Revolution became a very, very globally important concern, challenging the American imperialism, and especially after the napalm bomb were thrown in Vietnam. I think everyone was enraged. We all were college students at that time. And here, the women who took part in solidarity of the African liberation movement, or Cuban Revolution, or war against Vietnam, the solidarity for Vietnam, war against American imperialism, they felt that all these movements, they believed in social transformation, but they were not sensitive to women's question. And then we saw that so many women's movement became autonomous. They said, we are not autonomous from politics, but we will not work under the existing political structures, which are totally gender blind. They are not concerned. And simultaneously, we saw that around the same time, an economist from Denmark, Esther Bosrup, she did a very important work on understanding African polygamy. And she said that what is the material basis of African polygamy? She wanted to understand that. She ended up finding out that Africa, women are the major backbone of African economy. The food security and food sovereignty in Africa rest on women's shoulder. So don't treat women as a sponge on the economy. They are not just the beneficiary of the economy, but they are the active agent of economy. And that book, I think you can read it, is in public domain now. Anyone can download it. Women's Role in Economic Development. Such a simple, lucid way. And she stayed with the people. She examined the labor processes and labor relations and wrote this book, and it had a massive snowballing effect. United Nations started ECOSOC, Economic and Social Status of Women. It it asked all the member countries, 165 member countries, to come up with the status of women's committee, status of women's report. And India also prepared that report, 21 member committee, which traveled extensively throughout India. And the report that emerged was a towards equality report. And this report was debated in the parliament, and which brought out three shocking features: declining sex ratio. There was a continuous decline of proportion of women and girls in the population, declining work participation of women. In 1971 census, it showed only 11% women as a part of the workforce, and extremely high maternal mortality in India, which cannot be explained only by poverty, because there were countries poorer than India. So many African countries, sub-Saharan Africa, they had the pregnant woman had a better survival chances than in India. So there is something cultural. And that is, Indian women eat last, least, and leftover. So that also got brought out. Now, this report helped in giving a shock therapy to the movers and shakers and the policymakers, who were very complacent that India is the only country where so many goddesses are worshipped. And after independence, women don't have any problem. So that kind of complacency was given. And first time, there was an acceptance that state needs to, you can't have a laissez-faire so far as the women's question is concerned. State has to play affirmative role. State has to come up with the affirmative action to compensate for the historical injustices of last 5,000 years of patriarchal value system. And this is the countries after countries, they came up with the same kind of findings. Finally, United Nations also gave the statistical wing of United Nations, when it gave the data that women constitute 1/2 of world's population. They do 2/3 of world's work, because women's work is largely unpaid. What women get for the 2/3 of world's work is 1/10 of world's income, and they own only 1% of world's property. So this is the kind of a work which was done globally that resulted into an approach which is called WID approach, women in development approach. That women development process in the post-war period had bypassed women, and through affirmative action, we have to integrate women into the development process. And then the second approach that came, where person like Ela Bhatt, who said that when at any time there was a rationalization or mechanization or this thing, women were deprived of. And the way women were weeded out of the textile industry, which was historically, women had played very important role right from 19th century. And they said that it is development is bypassing women, whether it is agricultural mechanization in Punjab and Haryana, or whether it is a green revolution or white revolution or blue revolution, all of them are bypassing women. What we need is to form women's organizations. So women from the marginalized section, they have to come together. And this is the first trade union of women which was created, was a Self-Employed Women's Association, which had mandate. It was not only opposing the Chakka Jam and the approach of strike and gherao, but it was also integrating women in a developmental process by creating your own alternative in terms of Seva Bank, Seva Heart, creating forward and backward linkages, the insurance of women. So this was a very different new model of women. Similarly, we had in Bangladesh, we had a Grameen Bank. In Philippines, we had a Gabriela and Working Women's Forum. In Tamil Nadu, we had a Women Fisher Folks Union in Kerala. So this kind of approach, like creating a strength. And that was the time globally in Latin America also, women united will never be defeated. That was the slogan. And then by 1985, end of the decade, women's decade, 75 to 85 was a women's decade. In the Nairobi conference, the approach that came, that countries after countries, they were saying that yes, we are into street fighting, we are into politics of petitioning, but what we are getting, we are just posing the demands to the state. All power structures are controlled by men. So, and it is not that women are all angels, because all of us have a baggage of patriarchy. And if we do the gender sensitization and convince the movers and shakers and the opinion makers of our country that gender equality is not a zero-sum game. If women become empowered, it doesn't mean men are going to lose. It's the household, community, country, society, and the whole world, everyone will benefit. So gender sensitization became name of game. So all three approaches, women in development, women and development, and gender and development, they have played a very important role, and different organizations are following different methods. Now, with this kind of ideological understanding, because unless you have a vision, mission, goals, objectives, and ideology to back your move, you can't sustain yourself for a long time. So it's very important that why women's movement has been, with all ups and downs and with all major onslaught that come, we still have that kind of a consistency in the women's movement is mainly because of that kind of a conviction which ideology gives. So the main concerns of the women's organizations during the second wave, and this wave is called second wave. First wave was a freedom movement. Second wave is a post 70 women's rights movement that came, and they fought against declining sex ratio in Asia, because most of the Asian countries have adverse sex ratio, right to safe abortion as a backup service on demand by women, gender gap in education, reproductive rights of women, fight against draconian population control policy. A country like India, for nearly 18 months, we had emergency rule between 75 to 77, and the way people were picked up, poor people were picked up and forcibly sterilized. That is a very, very painful memory. Now also nobody can forget. There is a movie done by, movie made by Deepa Dhanraj, something like war. You can see it on YouTube. Okay, and she has captured what was happening at that time. It was worse than Hitler's concentration camp. Most of the women's movement in the second phase of feminism have been like very consistent fight against violence against women, draconian population control policy, portrayal of women in media. In fact, in the early 70s, the first thing that happened all over, whether it was in Delhi, fight against beauty contest pageant, Miss Coca-Cola, or the double meaning, the dramas and advertisement with double meanings, they were opposed in Gujarat.
I'm not sure we see your slides.
Oh, you can't see your slide? Oh, yeah, I need to share. Okay. Yeah. I have to share, no?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So we saw that the UN Charter, first of all, all these 165 countries who had signed the UN Charter of Equality, Development and Peace, the feminist and the women's rights movement demanded that equality should be substantive equality. They have to bridge the gap between what is promised and what is practiced. Second is the development. They also challenge the indicators of development, that modernization or mechanization or labor mobility or mass production is not development. Development indicators should be education, health, and employment. And when the UN was talking about the world peace and the world leaders were talking of world peace, women's movement demanded peace begins from home. That means if you are for peace, then there should not be domestic violence, there should not be ethnic tension and a conflict within the society. So violence at every aspect, in every sphere of life should be opposed. Unpaid care work also became a very important concern, because you know that most of the reports, status reports also showed that though women who were formally employed and who were getting wages and salaries, they were shown as a very limited proportion, but women did a lot of important work of unpaid care work, which was non-recognized, which was invisibilized, and it was there was a big, in 1978, several European countries had a wages for housework campaign, and in fact in Iceland there was 100% successful strike. Even for the Prime Minister's wife also went on a strike. And after that, Nordic countries, like they started including unpaid care work into the systems of national account, SNA. So when you write the GDP and gross national income, then below that there is a line, and then they say that what is the value, what is the worth of unpaid care work. And currently also under COVID pandemic, we have been discussing unpaid care work in a big way. For the first time, India has come up with the time use survey, that how do you use your time. The day you are interviewed, 24 hours before, what all you did you do, and that is divided into personal work, care work, and paid work. Okay, so you watch your TV, that is personal work. You do cooking, cleaning, carrying, and other bringing water and fodder, fuel, that is care work. And then there is a paid work which you do for working for some employer. And other thing is the question of alternate sexualities. For last 20 years, in several countries and in India, the LGBTQIA movement is also very powerful, and there are no contradictions between that women's movement and LGBTQIA movement. They are working in collaboration with each other, expressing solidarity and providing support to each other's demands and struggles. So feminist leadership and the strategies, like we know that in the emergence of autonomous women's movement, they believe in a small clusters where everyone has a right to speak, share experiences, amplify best practices, amplify each other's demands and needs. And another very important thing that happened was the emergence of women's studies for knowledge construction. Women's studies emerged out of the women's rights movement, and there is a continuous dialogue between women's studies and women's movement. In terms of knowledge construction, the participant experiences are highly respected in knowledge construction in women's studies. Your experiential knowledge, participatory technique. So you are not just an observer of what is happening out there, but you are also part of the process. A combination of theory and praxis. So most all the women's rights activists, they are theorizing. They are also public intellectual. They are reaching out to people not only in English but in all several regional languages also. Special interest group that were created because patriarchy is such a powerful institution. So you have to deal with it by creating documentation center and archives and working in a media, working in educational institution. And also some of the important slogans of the women's movement have been personal is political. You can't divide your personal life and your political life. So public and private, they are very much interconnected. Another thing, that peace begins from home became very catchy, because then you can't only talk about the world peace, but you have also see to it that there is a peacekeeping, peace building and peacemaking in the community, in the household, in the family. Sisterhood is powerful, highly contentious slogan, where the Black feminists, women, Dalit feminists, they have challenged that how can you talk about universal sisterhood? All these white women who are getting benefits of patriarchy, white male patriarchy, or the upper caste women who are getting patriarchy, who are getting benefits of upper caste patriarchy or a Brahminical patriarchy, how can they say that we have the same, we can have a sisterhood? No, so those questions are still there. And networks, creation of networks at a local level, state level, regional level, and global level, that is how the feminist solidarity is being expressed. The new women's groups have taken up the question of single issues also, like just fighting against only sex selection, or fighting against only communalism, or fighting against unjust family laws, or just fighting for legal reforms, reproductive rights of women. So single issue organizations have also been formed, and they have persisted for 20, 30 years. So there are organizations, just coalitions only fighting for land rights, land and housing rights, or the special needs of single women, Akhil Bharatiya All India Single Women's Association, which is focusing on only women who are either widow or separated or deserted or unmarried. So development agenda of the feminists, where feminists have always critiqued trickle-down theory, that nothing is going to come automatically. You have to really fight for this thing. And the question of when it came to Millennium Development Goal and also Sustainable Development Goal, a lot of criticism was there from the women's rights movement, that it was, except for goal number 3, which talked of empowerment of women, that also did not include violence against women, which is extremely debilitating reality and very, very important issue that to be taken up. And then in the midterm review, they included that, and currently in a sustainable development goal also, all 17 goals and 162 targets, they have also accepted in principle the gender mainstreaming. And in the COVID context, I think now this year's slogan that women's leadership, instead of talking about women in development, we should talk of women-led development, because we know that out of 204 countries, 25 countries which proactively worked to combat corona by allocating budget, by accepting macroeconomic policies in a very humane way, who did and who immediately strengthened the public health. The public health response was very strong in those countries. Out of these 25 countries, 18 countries were led by women. And though the population which covered by these 18 countries is 5.5 crore, it's a very 7% of world's population, but still they gave an example that if there is a will, there is a way. So you just can't only give free way to the pandemic profiteers. And so like India alone, in 11 months, India created 50 more billionaires. So you can imagine that what kind of economic policies we have pursued. So the bringing the gender concerns in the process of development, very important. And also the current stage of feminism, which is a discourse of discontent, where you see the totally new kind of discourses that are extremely important, from Dalit feminism, which talks about caste, class, and gender, tribal women's new leadership that is emerging, and also the emerging, the new sensibility and sensitivity we have acquired as a result of the LGBTQIA movement, which has challenged the feminist concentrating only on men and women. So you have to see beyond gender binary, that is what they say, and the diversity, acceptance of diversity, and bringing all those socially excluded people, excluded sections of society, and coming up with the inclusive policy. That has been the motto. The feminists have also critiqued the environmental policies and the dilution of environmental standards. And I think we know that Women Farmers Association, which is very active over last 10 years in 18 states of India, and they are currently also at the forefront of the struggle against 3 draconian farm laws, which are playing havoc with farmers' life. Most of the women, only 8% of women have a land ownership and land use rights. Ownership rights are with 12%, but the actual effective right to use their land the way they want, that is only with 8% of women, and they are also marginal farmers and poor peasants, and their ownership is of between half an acre to 2 to 5 acres. So they are also now very active, very vociferous. They are leading the struggles. They are expressing. They are actively involved in the struggle of farmers. The question for the livelihood is now very important issue, and alternatives which are created by some of these women's clusters to combat climate change, or to come up with the organic farming, or come up with the women's collectives, cooperative farming, and also keeping the forward and backward linkages to get all the livelihood support system to women, whether it is a fuel, fodder, water, or agriculture, kitchen gardening, food sovereignty. That is also very important. Me Too movement has also brought the issue of sexual harassment at workplace center stage. You know, this week only, the Priya Ramni, when the Supreme Court of India, the accused filed the petition for her arrest as a defamation case. So many, more than 25 women journalists, they also came in her solidarity, and they said they had experienced the same thing. So now the demand is that more women in more powerful and strategic position. That is very important. And in all, so the aspirations of women to come up, they are not like our mother's generation or grandmother's generation, who felt that this benevolent patriarch had given them a gift of allowing this kind of freedom or not. Now women see it as an entitlement for all kind of upward mobility and all levels of flourishing in every sector of the society. The societal role, educated women's societal role had also improved, but there is a glass ceiling, and women are challenging this glass ceiling in the corporate world. We are also seeing backlash of violence. In fact, World Bank has said that the most devastating occupational hazard of the 21st century is sexual harassment at workplace, because men feeling anxiety that women are competing with them, they are going ahead of them, and they will miss the bus. So that is also bringing very what you call backlash of violence against women. So that is many countries have now come up with the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace and the safe work ecosystem that you have to do. So one thing that women's rights movement has done is has given a new kind of leadership, which is forceful, which is fearless, which is intellectually articulate, and which is also believes in mentoring the younger generation. Like in Indian women's movement, I don't see that kind of an intergenerational conflict. In fact, today, most of the functions I attended, there were three generations of women. There were 16-year-old college girl also, and there were middle-aged women, and there were aging women like us. So I think that is one very important thing, that as the legacy, the new leadership and articulation that women's movement has given. Still, there are several challenges in front of the women's movement. One, the intensity and the variety and the dimension of violence that women are facing. Ecological movements where they provide the resource base for feminism and women with disability. That is also very, women with disability now they have started articulating, forming their own organizations, but still they feel that they are being treated as a piece of furniture, not as an individual in their own right. The system is so disabled unfriendly. Feminists who are shaping the health movement and reproductive health movement, they are facing a variety of challenges, and especially in the context of public health emergency that we faced, and this thing. Feminism in war zones and the conflict areas, we have seen the kind of challenges they are facing because of the devastation which the currently there are so many countries and places where the wars and ethnic conflicts and ethnic cleansing is happening. There, how as a feminist you get involved in actual practice. Feminist solidarity with the sex workers, that is happening increasingly all over the world, and in India also in a big way, because they have formed their own unions, they have formed their own NGOs, they work closely with the women's rights movement, provides them legal support, it provides them currently, during the pandemic for 11 months, they were not completely without any income or any kind of a support. Even the philanthropist organization, big philanthropic and religious organization, refused to provide ration kit and food package to them. It is only the women's organization. They did crowdfunding and they provided that. So this kind of a solidarity in practice becomes very important. Intersectionality as a worldview, an understanding, it makes you humble. You are understanding from other people's life situation, and at the same time always ready for solidarity. There have been so many polarized issues also in the women's movement. For example, family laws, which is linked to identity politics. Women from minority community says that we don't want the majoritarian understanding of so-called uniform civil code. We will fight our own battle of reform. Or even assisted reproduction. The LGBT movement, they say that there is nothing wrong in assisted reproduction, while most of the old generation feminists, they say that assisted reproduction only for altruistic purpose, yes, but commercialization of surrogacy, they are opposed to. Another thing is recently where the age of consent is going to be increased. Government of India said that for both men and women, the age of consent should be 21. And feminists have so many different opinions that instead of giving agency to women, you are talking about just mechanically increasing the age of marriage. And so many genuine lovers, they will also be punished, and in the context where whole society and the patriarchal value system sees that girl needs to be protected, the save the girl child, and boy is in conflict with the law, so automatically the boy becomes a criminal. So that is not going to solve the problem. Instead, we should enhance women's agency through education and decision-making power. Digital communities are created by the women's rights movement. We have a Feminist India Yahoo group where 5 generations of women are there. Young schoolgirls are also there. 90-year-old feminist is also there. The Prajna in Chennai has created its archives. Sparrow has a audiovisual archives. Awa Bai Wadia, she gave the endowment of whatever property she had for the archives to work on a reproductive health issue. CWDS has archives. So the art, humor, music, both offline and online, journals, most of the feminist knowledge production is in a public domain. All of them have deprivatized it because they have no commercial interest. So you can immediately download any document or journal or music or the songs or plays, script of the plays they have created. And the alliances that feminists have created, their horizons have increased. LGBTQIA movement or international debates, Indian feminists are very actively involved, both as actors. They are not just the passive recipient of the documents, but they are also very active in creation of this political understanding. And the development agenda is very important to feminists. The women's movement has 5,000 years of patriarchal value system, is challenged by the 200 years of women's movement, and the Indian women's movement over the last 50 years have gathered a different kind of momentum. So at one level, we see that the cultural nationalism and the sectarian forces are targeting, you can see currently also the highest number of the people who are arrested currently, they happen to be young women, and they are so forthright, they are so brave, they are so courageous. So they are the hope, like the future of the humankind is in the hands of these young women who are fighting all forms of oppression and injustices. These are some of the important writings by the feminist and the women's rights movement globally as well as in India. And I think most of them are, all of them are in public domain. They can be easily accessible. Thank you.
Let us give Professor Vibhuti Patel a round of applause before we move to the question and answer session. It can be hands, it can be clapping as well.
Yeah.
And, Shivanshi, it is to you to moderate the Q&A session. I shall, okay, I see that I need to take back the host function. Let's see how I do that.
Yeah.
Reclaim host, done. And then I will share my screen once again.
Even if you don't have Q&A, I think we have some veteran feminists amidst us. They can also enrich the discussion by their intervention.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Professor Patel, for such an instructive summarization. And yet it was so expansive, touched so much ground. Nothing less can be expected of you. You're an icon of women's movement in India, and which is both unique and fascinating in more ways than one. It is so unique. So I will be choosing some of the questions from the chat box, and also I will be opening the floor to questions later. So if people can start posting their questions in the chat box. Meanwhile, from the last session, we have a comment from Dr. K.R. Anthony, who says, I would like to recommend 2 steps by government to increase financial empowerment, and one on legal empowerment of women. Financial empowerment, first, the issue of PDS ration cards or any financial family benefit card in the name of eldest women in the household. Kerala has made it mandatory.
Yes.
Yes, and the second one is inheritance of parental property, land or immovable property to remain in the name of daughter by default lifelong. No transfer to husband's name unless there's a genuine reason. As far as legal empowerment is concerned, he proposes web-based e-filing of complaints on sexual harassment, rape, and attempt to murder from home laptops or private kiosks. No visit to male-dominated intimidating police stations and begging the police to get FIR filed. Any extra details have to be collected from home of the complainant. Any deposition of evidence has to be in presence of lawyer of her choice. So Professor Patel, if you could comment on that, and if other dignitaries can also comment.
I think all 3 interventions, they are time tested, and there's a long-standing demand of women right from the late 70s. We know that we had a very painful experience of criminal justice system during emergency. 5,000 women activists of our country were in Indian jails, and the kind of experience they had, such a horrendous experience. So in the post-emergency period, from the very beginning, we have said that the humiliating way, it's, first of all, it's a very terrorizing, it is very humiliating to deal with the police. The whole atmosphere in the police station is so misogynist. So even when we had a anti-rape movement in 1980, where Indian women activists had encircled the Parliament of India with women's chain, that time also we had demanded this kind of reform, that you cannot make survivor of a violence to such a brutal exposition. So I think what he says, and now with the IT enabled services, I think it's very important that women are not, they don't face another type of torture by repeating the same story in the police station. And especially the several state governments have also demanded all women police stations. So all cases of survivor of violence, women, they need not go to general police station. There are the women's police station. For example, in Gujarat, Baroda has a women's police station. Bhopal has a all women police station where only women are there and they can freely speak about this thing. So that is one. Second, when it comes to proper land rights of women, that is the demand which even Makam has, because most of the state, like in Maharashtra, what they did, that women can have a joint. There was after massive strong movement which was initiated by economist Sharad Joshi, who was earlier in World Bank, and he gave up his World Bank job, came back to Maharashtra, bought a land and became a farmer. And he was the one who raised this question of women, land titles and house titles in the name of women. And a big movement was created called Shetakari Sangatna, farmers movement. And after that, like Maharashtra government, once it said that, okay, women can have a joint title of land and housing, men willing. If men are willing, then, but men are never willing. So that to get these two words removed, men willing, it has taken like for past 20 years, we have been fighting, because even in the women's policy, it was accepted that women can have land rights. In fact, we had a very strong movement also in Bihar under Chhatra Yuva Sangharsh Vahini, where there was a fight against one big landlord who treated all the farmers as his slave, and women. There was a massive exploitation of women also, and the Bodh Gaya movement it is called. And after that also the land rights were accepted. The activists filed petition in the Supreme Court. Currently 2 petitions, one from Maharashtra by a tribal woman called Bhuribai, and another petition by Bhuribai and Dhagibai. 2 women have filed petition. Another one was filed by Laru Janko, that is, she is a tribal woman in Singapore. And the petition, the Supreme Court is not giving any judgment. So I think what Mr. Anthony says, it's only Andhra Pradesh is the only one state where the land rights of women are granted, and that too because of the Chief Minister, Mr. NTR. It is in his time that the land rights were granted to women. But still, it is a long battle. There are states after states which have created, like Gujarat created a network of women in the farm sector. And they worked along with an economist, Veena Agarwal. And there also the Supreme Court, the petition was filed. And as a result of which we also got act where the Hindu Code Bill, in that daughters became the co-partner. It's the co-partnery right of the ancestral land and ancestral property is now both sons and daughters can have. So that one change came in 2010 after a lot of efforts. But still it is notional because it is there on paper. In practice, we don't see women enjoying any kind of land, and especially the land use right. Even if you have a nominal, if it's even just to avoid the Land Ceiling Act, they may keep a woman as an owner of land, but does she have any operational right? So that is also very important. Yeah.
I would invite Ms. Alia Kareem to please unmute. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Patel, for a very enriching and comprehensive presentation. My question is very so there's so much to unpack from what you presented, and what was a reoccurring theme for me was just a little bit of background about me. I'm an epidemiologist, and I'm currently based in Switzerland, and we're leading a public private health organization. And one of the things that I am very personally invested in is women's rights and public health, and how the two are inextricably linked. And once you increase women's access and women's rights, then you ultimately increase health outcomes. But what I'm constantly overwhelmed by is the multifaceted layers when we're talking about women's rights and gender empowerment, and the cyclical nature of how solving one problem leads to another. So the first aspect that I see is, one thing is we're really just dealing with changing people's feelings, specifically changing men's feelings. And if it's really a question of a dynamic shift in the way people think, that should be something that should technically be easy. We get Bollywood involved, we get our relatives involved, and we slowly start a conversation. But it becomes a very big problem when we're all discussing in silos. And in so many events that I've attended today for International Women's Day already, it's 99% women. I think that it's quite a bit more diverse in this group. So I have to applaud Arun for facilitating that, and the rest of the people that in SDG 5 that were involved in ensuring that that wasn't the case. I'm getting to a point, I promise. So one of the things that I'm curious to know from your opinion, and also the other experts that are in the chat, is how do we move forward if especially part of the problem are these globalistic, neoliberal, capitalistic policies that are inherent structural part of what makes, specifically focusing on India, what makes India, India? Because as long as there's a Zara, as long as there's an H&M, you're going to have women's economic disenfranchisement and disempowerment. As long as you have men that are part of the police force, you're going to have these problems when it comes to gender-based violence. As long as you have people that are uneducated in a country where there's nearly 2 billion people, what are the structural policies that we can put into place that don't completely combat the very basis of what makes India, India? And I'm talking more from an economic vantage point.
I think so. Challenging neoliberalism, it has to be done at all three levels. One is grassroots, the pressure, the way the farmers movement currently, or so many local level struggles which are going on against this increase in labor intensity, or giving up 48 labor laws centrally, which working class won after 150 years of collective bargaining. Everything they are wiping out, and the people are not accepting it silently. So so a lot of things are happening at a ground level. That pressure has to continue. Number two, laterally, with like sensitization of so many people in the governance structure, especially the local self-government bodies, because now we have a 14 lakh women. Okay, so 1.4 million women who are elected representatives in the urban and local self-government bodies, and they are the ones who have to face music when the budgetary cuts takes place, or when the schools close, or when so many girls, currently 1 crore, that means 10 million Indian girls are out of school. They are forced out of school because they don't have a online facility, and if there is a one smartphone, it goes to a boy. So this kind of a local level struggle that is happening, and the sensitive elected representatives in the local self-government bodies and the governance structure, I think that there we can reach out, and because they are the ones who always invite feminist and women's rights activists to interact on developmental issues, social sector issue, because the others are just busy minting money. They will not even come for such social sector work. And third one is also forcing the judiciary and elected representatives to come up with the measures of social justice or gender justice or social security, and that all these three things have to be done simultaneously, and then only I think we can get. And so that means the momentum has to be continued. We have to keep this agenda center stage. We have to continuously hammer, and also through our tongue power, through our lung power, through our research, through our data, and now with information technology, whole world is watching. So I think naming and shaming also plays very important role, because when it came to maternal mortality, India had one of the highest maternal mortality, and it was only after massive naming and shaming of India in the global discourse that even African countries had a better performance than that of India, that now system is now responding to the reproductive health issues of women. Only after continuous Zoom meeting and continuous Twitter storm, which the People's Health Assembly, Jan Swasthya Sabha, Medico Friend Circle, a Forum for Medical Ethics, all these health organizations combined together, they built the pressure, and then that is why you could see that whatever public health facilities which were taken away from reproductive health or a women's health issue, that the focus was given, and the ministry also provided the data that they have only data about 25% women who were pregnant and 70% children who were born during Corona. So this is the major mistake which they have done. by not providing, and it created so much of human misery. So I think constantly you have to negotiate, you have to build pressure, and you have to also come up with very solid evidences so that it can feed into the policies what you. So I think we all have to do a lot of hard work. I think that's very important. But I think we have seen extremely dark days of emergency, those 18 months where India did not have any freedom of expression, and still we survived, okay, because we fought. So I think recent times, if we are united, if we are work, and we always provide solidarity to each other. Currently, you can see there is so much of solidarity for the farm movement. The moment government cuts electricity, there are people, private people, they would give them electricity. The food packets are reaching, crowdfunding, this thing. All most of the students of mine, they said, ma'am, we went there for 4 days, 5 days. We've helped them run the classes. We've helped them. We worked in the kitchen. We worked in the health center. So I think this kind of people-to-people solidarity, when you see, and that we have seen in a great way even during these 11 months, the way community kitchens were run, the way people were providing shelter, they were providing facilities to bathe to all those homeless people when they were walking. Throughout the road, there were people from the community. They were going with the food and water and footwear and this thing for babies and for various kinds of health emergencies also they attended to. So this gives me hope. So the elite is cruel, elite is very self-seeking and the thing, but people, they are always there to support each other. So, and so many learnings are also, the pandemic has also taught people to be humble. All those fun-loving youth, now they are so, they used all their resources for supporting the people who were facing difficulties.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kareem. Thank you, Professor. If there are more questions, you may raise your hands or you may type them in the comments. I have a comment from Vasundhara Rangaswamy who says, and even in a so-called progressive state like Tamil Nadu, age for marriage fell, especially for girls during COVID. Sad. This is telling about the respect given to this gender.
Yeah, and also some of the recent judgments where the rapist was asked to marry, and the rapist himself is married. And this girl is a minor, she's pregnant, and they said that once she becomes major, will you marry her? That also Tamil Nadu High Court said. Then same happened in Madhya Pradesh High Court, and currently the Supreme Court of India, where women's movement has collected signatures that he should be, he has no right to be the Supreme Court judge. When he asked the rapist that will he marry her, and rapist is himself already married, and he wants her to enter into bigamy. And nobody focuses on the pain of a rape survivor. And first of all, it's so inhuman to even ask that the one who has violated you, who has you are expected to marry that person. So I think that's what I say, that elite is more conservative than the people. That's what, whether it's the intellectual elite or the bureaucrats or politicians with vested interests, they are the ones who are taking such regressive stand, but nobody is silently suffering. Everyone is opposing. There is a lot of ground level opposition that is happening. Media is writing about it. People are creating various ways. Even in the midst of partial lockdown and curfew kind of situation, people are braving. They are coming out. Today, if you see the kind of activities that have happened throughout the day all over India, and even those who were the fence sitter and who were just onlooker, now they are also, the soft Hindu types, they are also now feeling that things are going overboard. We have to take stand, no? And also the question of identity politics, about that also people are feeling very, very upset. Even the kind of rabid anti-minority stance with the ruling party, rulers are taking. So that against that also, so many oppositions and so many collective efforts are made to combat that.
May I suggest that we move to the vote of thanks? I think we are again running out of time. It has been a terrific session with Professor Vibhuti Patel. Nidhi?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Aishwarya.
Already strong. It is about changing the way the world perceives that strength, isn't it? So, dear friends, it has been immense pleasure to listen to Professor Vibhuti Patel this evening. Her lecture has been as enlightening as it has so been inspiring. It was a sheer joy to listen to her words and her wisdom, distilled by her intellectual curiosity and deep concern for the women in India and the world over, through long years of rigorous scholarship and passionate research. Thank you so much, Professor. We thank Professor Patel for her generosity in spontaneously agreeing to come and speak to us today at this event organized by Gender Justice India. And I thank our audience, which has consisted of men and women committed to the cause of women's empowerment and